Modern Money Primer blog number 18, Responses by L. Randall Wray. Thanks for the comments. Let me provide a dozen responses by topic. Question 1. What about interest on reserves? Answer. Chairman Bernanke moved to pay interest on reserves a couple years ago, joining other countries like Canada that do so. Does that make any difference? Yes and no. First, it simplifies operations and renders treasury bond sales superfluous. Since the purpose of bond sales is to provide an interest-earning alternative to non-interest-paying reserves, once you pay interest on reserves, that is effectively the same thing as a bond. Ergo, you can stop selling bonds. Now, why do you sell bonds when reserves don't pay interest? Because excess reserves in the system drive overnight rates below the central bank's target. It then sells bonds to offer the alternative. But the easiest way to hit a target interest rate is to charge, say, 50 basis points. 100 basis points equals 1 percentage point on loans at the discount window, then to pay 25 basis points on reserves held at the central bank. The overnight market rate on interbank lending, Fed funds in the U.S., cannot deviate from the 25 to 50 basis points range. These are the ceilings and floors. You can do the same thing with sheep wool. Government pays $25 to buy wool and sells at $50, so wool never rises above $50 nor falls below $25. The narrower the range, the smaller the flux of overnight rates. Now, as we know, the U.S. and Canada still sells bonds. This mostly has to do with the maturity structure. Reserves are close substitutes for very short-term bonds, that is, 30-day bills, and the central bank normally stays at the very short end. Not that treasuries understand any of this. When rates on 30-year maturity bonds are low, they issue lots of those thinking they'll save on interest payments. But any central bank with a floating rate can set the overnight rate anywhere it wants, and then just pay interest on reserves. No need to ever issue long maturity debt. Call your treasury official and explain this. Stop issuing bonds equals never run up against debt limits equals never have kindergarten level debates in Congress about debt limits. Question 2. In real terms, do government deficits take away real saving? Answer. At full employment, government deficits move resources away from other uses to the public purpose. That might be good, it might be bad. With fewer resources available for private use, private investment might be lower. In that sense, private real saving is less. Fewer shopping malls, more schools and museums. Less investment in producing social life-altering underarm sprays and more investment in bridges that do not collapse into rivers. I don't know which to choose. But I've been flying a lot, avoiding bridges but sitting next to passengers who could use the spray. Judge for yourself. In nominal terms, however, government deficits create equivalent private savings, dollar for dollar. Full disclosure, some can leak out to imports from Mars, etc. Question 3. How does the central bank affect interest rates? Using open market operations, OMO? Does it use the Fed funds rate or discount rate? Is the 10-year bond rate set by the central bank or by the market? Answer. From above, we know central banks target overnight interest rates and can use the ceilings and floors approach. Lend at the discount window at 50 basis points and pay 25 basis points on reserve balances, in which case the market rate will flux between the two. Is this done through open market operations? Not really. If the central bank announces it will move its target rate from the range of 25 to 50 basis points to 50 to 75 basis points, it does not need to engage in any open market operations. All it does is to increase its rate paid on reserves to 50 and increase its discount rate charged to 75. And then, presto, changeo. Market rates move. So you can see it uses both the Fed funds rate target and the discount rate charged, as well as the support rate paid on reserves. What about longer maturities like the 10-year? It could do the same in that maturity, offer to buy at an interest rate equivalent to 200 basis points and to sell at 150 basis points, and you can bet your bottom dollar that the 10-year will trade in that range. But normally, central banks do not do that. Quantitative easing tried a back-assward way to do it, using quantity rather than price to get long rates down. Didn't work, but who says Bernanke knows what he's doing? Question 4. What is endogenous versus exogenous? Answer. It is somewhat arbitrary, and these terms are used in different senses for the truly wonky statistical, theoretical, or common senses or control senses. To keep it simple, most people use these to refer to the policy sense. Does the government control the variable? For example, does the central bank control the money supply or the interest rate? Well, it clearly cannot control the money supply. However, measured except in the sense that it can do a Bernanke and fill banks full of excess reserves that cannot get out. But it clearly can set overnight interest rates. All of them do. So that is called exogenous, control of interest rates. Question 5. If the deficit gets bigger and bigger, doesn't it have to get repaid later out of savings? Answer. No. The U.S. government debt was only repaid once in our nation's history, 1837. That will never happen again. Bet on it. Question 6. In a fixed exchange rate system, does government really choose to spend less or raise its interest rate target to protect currency? Answer. Yes, in the sense that it can choose not to do so and then deal with the consequences. You can choose not to drive on the right or left side of the road. You might not enjoy the outcome. I've done it. You probably have to. You might even choose to drive above the speed limit too. There are consequences, and we all deal with them. Question 7. Does it matter if government spends money into existence for interest payments rather than wages, as in the Employer of Last Resort program? Answer. Yes. It can also spend money into existence to support fat cat Wall Street fraudsters. Good idea? Maybe not. Will it run out of funds? No. Question 8. Use GDP income measure rather than GDP expenditure measure. Answer. Well, by identity, they are identical. But yes, it does matter that the wage share in the U.S. has dropped toward third world status, about 50% of national income versus 25% in Mexico. And so for consumption to grow, Americans had to borrow heavily. Bad idea. Question 9. MMT has an unwarranted fixation on nominal versus real. Answer. Give me a break. Neil, I guess you slept all through last week. See blog 17. If anyone suffers from a fixation, it is our Austrian brethren, who are so fixated on real that they cannot understand that we live in a monetary economy. Thanks, Eric in Calgacus. Question 10. Can the central bank compel banks to support higher reserve levels? Can the central bank control interest rates without issuing reserves? Answer. Central bank can raise required reserve ratios and banks, magically, will hold more. That acts like a tax on banks, increasing their cost of doing business as reserves pay very little, that is 25 basis points. Banks are less profitable. Not sure why we want that. In the Canadian system, bank holdings are right about zero, since the Bank of Canada requires zero and operates with a ceiling and floor interest rate as described above. Nice system. Sometimes those Canadians surprise you with how clever they can be. So, yes, they hit their interest rate targets even as banks essentially hold no reserves, but they do use them for clearing, which is all that matters. Question 11. How are government bonds issued? Answer. By Treasury to special banks that use reserves to buy them. The central bank supplies the reserves the banks need. We'll do more of this later. Question 12. I go to a bank and it creates a loan. Does it create money out of thin air? Is this disreputable? Answer. Yes and no. It takes your IOU and creates its own IOU, your demand deposit, out of a keystroke to a computer tape. Sounds a bit sexy, but not at all pornographic. It is the bank's IOU. It gets your IOU, loan, and goes into debt, demand deposit. It does not get something for nothing. If it eventually earns profit on the deal, that is a reward for underwriting, determining that you are no scumbag deadbeat borrower who will default. I think that's the nicest thing I've ever said about a banker. Made her sound almost like Jimmy Stewart. On that note, I should stop.